Now, folks, you've heard me berate another YouTuber on no understanding the left or what the left is, what socialism is. So I thought I would take a wee interlude here for younger viewers who wouldn't have lived through socialism, what it is. Tell them what it is. Then we'll talk a wee bit about socialism 1947 to 1979 and where it all went wrong. Okay. So for any young viewers that might actually stumble across this and don't quite understand what socialism is, socialism is an economic and political philosophy that advocates for the common or public ownership of the means of production and distribution of goods, such as factories and natural resources, as opposed to private ownership. The goal is to create a more equitable society by controlling wealth and resources through collective action, often via the state or government. Social ownership can take various forms, including public, cooperative, and collective ownership. Core principles of socialism. Social ownership. The central idea is that resources and industries that create wealth should be owned and controlled by the community or the state, not by private individuals or corporations. Economic equality is also one of its core principles, and that aims to reduce wealth and power disparities by ensuring that the means of production are not concentrated in the hands of a few capitalists. Collective decision making is also a core principle, and it emphasises democratic or collective control over how resources are used and how goods are produced and distributed. Production for use is also a core principle, and the aim is to produce goods and services to meet the needs of the population rather than for private profit. Variations of related concepts, types of ownership. Social ownership can manifest in different ways, such as state-owned enterprise, worker cooperatives, and community-based initiatives. Markets versus non-market socialism. Some socialist systems are non-market, aiming to eliminate markets and market forces entirely, while others are market socialists, retaining market mechanisms for some aspects of the economy. Then, of course, communism. Communism is often described as a specific, more radical form of socialism based on the ideas of Karl Marx, which seeks to abolish private property and class distinctions entirely. Now, forms of socialism. Here in the UK, we have now got democratic socialism, a form of socialism that operates within a democratic political framework and is often associated with social democratic parties which advocate for a strong social safety net and public services. Now, for the younger viewers out there, we here on these islands after the Second World War experimented with socialism, and it led to the creation of the welfare state, the NHS and all these things. We took important infrastructure and important industries into public hands, such as chemical, coal, oil, gas, water, electricity, all come into it. We're all in public hands. And then, of course, power to the people get out of fucking hand when we go to the 1970s. It get right out of hand. Up until then, when we were building the welfare state and the safety nets, everything was going well. 1975, round about, things started going tits up. Power had went to the people's heads. The trade unions had lost the fucking plot. Why not? Everybody out. Solidarity, brother. So the place stopped working. And of course, capitalism started to fight back as well. And the capitalism that they were facing was the top of the socialist enterprises, the management. It started getting out of hand. Why not? Everybody out. That led to the 3-day week and the general strike. That also led to collapses of government, and it also led to Margaret Thatcher. She took it gone in the other direction too far as well. There were things that we didn't need to offload, with the car industry. That had to go. The chemical industry, well, that was the first one to go actually. The railways, they should have stayed in public hands. Water should have stayed in public hands. Electricity should have stayed in public hands. Everything else, oil and gas should have stayed in public hands. But everything else, by that time, it went too fucking far. The trade unions held all the power. And as I say, it was solidarity, brothers, one out, everybody out. So for any young people watching, and anybody who wasn't quite aware what socialism was, that's what it was. And the UK did experiment with it. And for a good period of time after the Second World War, we were a socialist country. Prior to that, it was considered social democrat, social democracy. We're still considered a social democracy now, but for a short period of time between 1947 and 1979, we were actually a socialist society. And for a while it worked, until the power went to the people's heads.
Now for a shameless plug. Read my book, Manufactured Fear. It comes with instructions on how to give yourself the perfect man bun like mine.
From those lovely chaps over at All Shots Studios that they are, and just in time for Grift Mass. I mean Christmas, that I do. I bring you suckers and mugs, that you are my finest selection of songs, that they are. In the Mr Shifty McGrifty Full-Tide collection.
Coming to all good chemists and pharmacies, the new Phyllis, Pepto-Bismol, which should help to ease those uncomfortable moments in your life.
When you have nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea.
This is the bit in the show where we get our political education hat on. We spoke about socialism and its core principles and tenets. Today we're going to talk about liberalism. Okay, what is liberalism? Liberalism is a prominent political and moral philosophy concentrated on the values of individual liberties, individual liberty, equality, consent of government and individual rights. It has evolved significantly over time, and its meaning can differ substantially between regions, particularly between the United States and Europe. Now, the core principles of liberalism is individual liberty and rights, a belief in fundamental individual freedoms, including freedom of speech, press, assembly, religion, and the rights to private property. Now, why is that there? Why the rights to private property, folks? Well, in the feudal system, generally the landowner owned all the property. So the landlord would own all the property. Anyway, so consent of the governed. The idea that the government's political authority is legitimised only if it derives from the consent of the people, often expressed through representative democracy and the rule of law. Limited government, a constitutional order that restricts the power of the state to prevent it from infringing upon individual freedoms. Equality, the principle of political equality and equality before the law. Limited government, a constitutional order that restricts the power of the state to prevent it from infringing upon individual freedoms. Equality. The principle of political equality and equality before the law, rejecting hereditary privileges and discriminations. Now, there's a couple of types of liberalism which have evolved over time, folks, and we'll cover the two main ones here, okay? Now, the main divergence within liberalism is between its classic and modern forms, which proposes different ideas about the government's role in achieving and protecting liberty. Now, classic liberalism, the traditional form, influenced by thinkers like John Locke and Adam Smith, views the state as a primary threat to individual freedoms. It advocates for limited government, a right watchman statute if you like, focused on protecting basic rights and properties, and generally supports laissez-faire economics, or free market economics if you like. All right. In much of Europe today, the term liberalism often refers to this perspective, in other words, free market economy. The modern liberalism, sorry, we got stuck with that one, modern liberalism, also called social liberalism, emerged in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. This perspective argues that individual freedoms can also be threatened by powerful private actors, such as large corporations, and by conditions like property, disease, and lack of opportunity. It advocates for an active government role, including economic regulation, social safety nets, social welfare in other words, and public services, education, healthcare, that sort of thing, to ensure that all individuals have a genuine opportunity to realise their potential. In the United States, liberalism almost exclusively refers to this modern centre-left approach. In essence, liberalism is a flexible framework that constantly re-examines how best to balance liberty, equality, community, in the light of changing social needs. Okay, let's get back to the tenets of it. All right, and then we'll get to the variations of it. The tenets of it, they all sound very good, don't they? Individual liberties and rights, consent of the governed, limited government. That one, that's disputed in modern liberalism. And equality, the principle of political equality and equality before the law, rejecting hereditary privileges and discrimination. Well, we've seen that being abused here lately. Andy being a perfect example of that. Now, classic liberalism, folks. Classic liberalism is what we had up until the UK entered into what I called last week its experiment with socialism. Okay. It's experiment with socialism. Now, as I say, the type of classic liberalism was practiced up until 1947 when we entered into the socialist experiment here in the UK, and the socialist experiment lasted for 32 years. So far, modern liberalism has lasted 42 years, but we can argue whether it's actually been classic modern liberalism for the whole of the 42 years, because since about 2008 and the crash, we've seen neoliberalism come to the fore, and that's concerning. But neoliberalism is for another day. We'll stick to modern liberalism at this point in time, in classic liberalism. As I say, the modern liberalism experiment here in the UK started with the election of Thatcher. That's where the term neoliberalism comes from, but it wasn't. It was just modern liberalism. It has become neoliberalism, but as I say, that's a different subject altogether. And it advocates for a different form of government. Okay, so modern liberalism, also called social liberalism, emerging in the late 19th century, early 20th century. This perspective argues that individual freedoms can also be threatened by powerful entities, and that's where neoliberalism comes into it, folks. Because neoliberalism, we begin to see these corporate entities enter into governments. If we have a look at companies like SEV, G4S, and things like that, who are all getting massive contracts for government to run things like parliamentarian and things like that. This is where we get to neoliberalism, where we talk about corporate governance. You know, because they then are taking over the government. The corporations are now taking over government. Started off with Margaret Thatcher and the utilities. Now it's actually taking their central government roles. And whole government departments are actually being run by private entities, corporate bodies. So when we get neoliberalism and the sort of governance it advocates for very little in the way of governance when it comes to the people we elect. It's more about corporate governance, control, if you like, and we can see that happening at the moment. So that's liberalism, folks. Up until we started the socialist experiment in 1947, we lived under classic liberalism. Maggie Thatcher came to power, we moved on to modern liberalism. We have now accelerated into the realms of neoliberalism. And could the liberal experiment be about to come to an end? It's highly possible that our experiment with modern liberalism is about to come to an end. Will it be neoliberalism in the future? Or will the people coming up behind us invent something new as we get through the end of this neoliberal period or modern liberal period? So, as I say, the socialist experiment only lasted for 32 years. So far, we're on 42 years of modern liberalism. How much longer will this experiment go? Well, it will be up until somebody comes up with a new direction. It won't be socialism of the past. It won't be liberalism as it stands. It will be something different. But will it be fascism? The modern liberalism, the modern liberalism